Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jayakula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
So a teacher, Tsogyam Gyamtso Rinpoche, he's a Kagyu teacher. He's very elderly now. But when I was living in Berkeley long ago and far away, I had really wonderful opportunity to go to a retreat with him. And that was the only time I ever sat with him, but it was one of the most life-changing experiences. Just being around him was such a demonstration and a transmission of what this is all about. And he didn't say during that retreat, but there's this quote that I found of his, mistaking, I follow the unmistaken path. And I really love this because, of course, we live in this culture where everyone is just so afraid of being wrong, so afraid of making mistakes, that it's almost paralyzing. In fact, it actually is paralyzing. It's not almost paralyzing. People live their lives trying to avoid the appearance of being wrong or having made a mistake. I mean, they're not even afraid of the consequences of the mistake. They just don't want to be seen to have made one. This is really a disease of our culture here in the United States. And what Tsogyam Gyamtso Rinpoche is saying is that the path is made up of stumbling, that we stumble along. And that's how we reach knowledge of the self. And what does that stumbling actually consist of? Well, it just consists of trying our best to understand the view, trying our best to do practice, trying our best to let the practice do its work and not interfere with it too much, trying our best not to get distracted from what is really important to us, what we really value, trying our best to integrate our practice and be in the state of our practice. But of course, 90% of the time we're failing at that. And that is also God showing up like that. The mistakes or what we call mistakes are part of the path. And they're really, if we look at the bigger view, so that idea of like mistaking, I follow the unmistaken path. If we're following the inner divination of the heart, if we're following the sweetness, if we're following the goodness, we really can't go wrong. So for instance, I'll give you an example. If I try to listen to Guru, or I try to do inner divination in the heart, or I try to do outer divination, and I misinterpret something, but I sincerely follow that misinterpretation, it's fine. It's just fine, because the only thing that really matters is sincerity. So that is the relative teaching, but the absolute teaching is that mistakes and non-mistakes are the same. They have absolutely equal value. and in fact, there are no such things as mistakes, which is what you discover eventually. You may not like the consequences of some of your actions, but that doesn't mean you made any mistakes just because you don't like it. It's just something that happened, right? Something that happened. Tsogyam Gyamtso Rinpoche is, by some people, thought to be a reincarnation of Milarepa. And he writes dohas. He writes songs. In fact, his songs were the first ones that I ever encountered. I didn't know about the doha tradition until I went to this retreat. And I've told this story so many times because it was so hilarious. But he has a couple of American students who are like some of his principal students. And one of them, he writes tunes for these songs that are, I don't know what Rinpoche's original tunes are, but this guy translates them for Rinpoche and then writes these tunes that are like Western, like country Western tunes. They're hilarious. So I went to this retreat and they were learning this song, Equality and Seven Things to Forget, which is just a spectacular doha, spectacular teaching. but they were singing it in this funny tune, and everyone was going like this. When I realize everything's equality, I forget all about my good friends and my relatives. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? It was actually the very first Buddhist teaching I ever went to. And I just couldn't believe it. But being in Rinpoche's presence was absolutely electrifying and terrifying, as I've often described. Just watching him and feeling him and getting that transmission of the condition he was in made me feel every single tension in my entire life. Like, I just felt like this. It was absolutely, completely uncomfortable, but fascinating and thrilling at the same time. I had read an interview with Tsultrim Gyaltsen Rinpoche, and I was really impressed by this interview, and that's why I went to the teaching. The other thing that happened during this retreat, I mean, it was really just a real touchstone for me in my life. There was a young woman who was one of Rinpoche's students who was sitting in the front row, and at one point during the retreat, he just looked down at her like, and I saw her go like this. And you could tell she was just exhausted. And she got up and she did the dance of the Vajra Yogini, and it was so amazing. Like, she just, like, her guru asked her, not even with words, to do this. And she just was so exhausted, but she pulled it out, and it was amazing. It was just so beautiful to watch their relationship and how full on she was, and it was great. And then after having looked at her like this, as she was dancing, he just looked at her with this melting tenderness. So beautiful. So this is Satsang, and you can ask any question that you like, or rant or pontificate as you please.
Shambhavi, that teaching reminds me of another teaching that I can't repeat verbatim, but I think it's something Ma said about going out beyond certainty and uncertainty. Talk about it.
Yeah. There are a lot of pairs of opposites that we deal with in our lives. Certainty and uncertainty is one of them. But going beyond that means that there's been recognition of the nature of the self beyond any possible doubt. There's no question of uncertainty, and so there's also no question of certainty. There's just that, and it's hard to describe, but there's simply no word like that has an opposite that would encompass that experience. This is when you get, the first stage of recognition, both the Trika and the Dzogchen tradition. And Trika, it's called Pratyabhigna. It means that you recognize the nature of the self. You recognize living presence. But having recognized it doesn't mean that you are immersed in it or can maintain a constant recognition of it. There's still a lot of, as Ma said, coming and going, or mistaking, stumbling, getting distracted, coming back, getting distracted, coming back. And that's pretty much everyone's condition forever. But at some point, there is constant recognition. And one of the things that is the harbinger of that is it becomes very easy to become re-immersed in presence. So at first, it's like something very ephemeral, but it becomes more and more concrete as time goes by and less doubtable, and easier to find your way back to it. At first it's like, oh my God, it disappeared. That recognition disappeared for 3 months and I have no idea how to get it back. That can be very frustrating and worrisome. But eventually it just becomes very easy to find your way back or into. And then eventually you can't really lose it.
But would you riff a little bit on lying and not lying?
Yeah. That wasn't one of my teachers. That was Padmasambhava in a book of teachings to Yeshe Tsogyal. Someone taught me that. He told her, don't fabricate even so much as an atom. That was his teaching to her. And it just impressed me, of course, because we live in the time of great lying, great fabricating. So the overarching, really practical reason not to lie is because it damages your ojas. It damages your immunity. It damages your ability to love yourself. It damages your ability to love other people and feel compassion. And it is actually creates health issues and feeling of disconnect and lack of intimacy, feeling like you're just running all the time and can't catch up, feeling that you're a fake. All of these things that lying creates are really damaging to our ojas, and ojas is our bridge to universal love. That's one way of talking about universal love and compassion. So honesty is an absolutely bedrock part of sadhana. And, no matter how hard you practice, and no matter what rules you follow or what vows you keep or whatever you do, if you don't have the ability to be honest with yourself and then with other people, you can really only get so far, right? Because we can only practice with what is. We cannot practice with lies. So in our culture right now, especially, we are expected to lie. We're expected to have a personal brand. We're expected to promote ourselves in certain ways in public. We're expected to exaggerate and lie on our resumes. It's expected. We're trained to do that, right? We're trained to not tell the truth in personal relationships. It's completely thought to be okay. We're trained to feel gleeful if we get away with cheating in the supermarket line. If we get away with cheating on our taxes, it's applauded. There's just so many layers and so many ways in which, for some people, their entire existence is one fabrication after another. And then there's always been this urge for people to present their best self, which is basically a made-up self. So all of this combined, this constant self-fabrication, constant projection of a personal brand, constant trying to avoid conflict with omissions and lies. When we get into the spiritual realm, wanting to be thought of as spiritually great, or just being very attached to progressing in a certain way that we've made up. We think we know what that looks like, so we're going to fabricate some stuff. We don't even half the time know that we're lying to ourselves. And then, of course, it takes a lot of effort to maintain all that. It creates a lot of insecurity, a lot of anxiety about everything, how we look, what we're accomplishing, what people think of us. One of the things I've been struck by working with a lot of people who are much younger than I am, a couple generations younger than I am, most of them, is how anxious they are about what other people think of them. And it's pretty overwhelming and can really eat up the energy of a whole life, worrying what other people think of you and whether you're likable. And of course, if you're not being yourself, if you're constantly massaging your self-image, then you never know if people like you, because who are they liking when they say they like you? They're liking this thing that you've cobbled together and that you're projecting. And then, of course, you're afraid to make mistakes, whatever, fuck up or let the veil drop, let the mask drop. And social media is like one lie after another. Even now, when we get on FaceTime or Zoom or Google Hangouts or something like that, CGI is applied to our faces automatically, right? And Zoom, you can turn it off, but some of the apps, you cannot turn it off. So that means everybody's smoothed out, right? We're all going to start looking like Odo on Deep Space Nine. He was a character who had very few facial features. He was just sort of a sketch of a human, right? Or you have people shooting themselves up with Botox so that nothing moves. It's just like the weirdest look. So all of this, it's not just that it's fake. There's no moral judgment about that. I don't care if people are fake. It's what it does to you that is the problem, and the energy drain that it represents, and the anxiety that it provokes, and the constant sense of being on some sort of treadmill and running and getting nowhere, and the lack of and loss of intimacy that it represents. So none of this helps your spiritual practice. It certainly doesn't help your life, but none of it is in any way helpful or supportive of your spiritual practice. It's hard to step out of it, but it's also fun to step out of it. If you have a little bit of a rebel side or a bratty side like I do, it's fun to go against the grain a little bit. There was a while when I wasn't really doing social media like I am now. And when I decided to do more because of various reasons, I was thinking about my Facebook page and how I'm just going to say whatever I want. I don't care like what anybody thinks of it, or whether I often get messages on Facebook about something I said wasn't appropriate for a spiritual teacher, or blah, 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 and of course, being who I am, I get a bit of a kick out of that. But in any case, think about the areas in your life where you could drop the mask, where you could stop projecting, where you could stop doing that labor. I would say you don't get paid for it, but you actually do. So I don't know, it's not always unpaid labor. So think about all the areas of your life. And when you stop lying, when you stop fabricating, even so much as an atom, it is so hugely relaxing. So hugely relaxing. And then, of course, you get that energy back, and you get that energy to rejuvenate and to build Ojas and to maintain your Ojas. And then you have much more of a cushion in life. You have much more ability to adapt and find joy even in difficult circumstances, and, kind of let things roll over you that would normally knock you over. But this situation where we're constantly fabricating and lying by omission and all the things that we do just creates incredible fragility. Anything could knock us over and cause us to have a ruined day or a ruined week or a ruined year. Our reputation, right? We're also concerned about that. And there's so much self-fashioning. I mean, I remember when I was young, I guess it was in the 70s or something. It was when Nixon was president. And probably most of you don't really remember much about that, but the revelation of the tapes that Nixon had where he recorded conversations in his office really struck people in a way that now would seem, oh yeah, of course, whatever. But back then it wasn't expected, where the public face of the president was so radically different from the private face. So hearing Nixon and his buds cursing and saying all these really mean things and politically illegal things or just illegal was actually shocking back then. Now, it's like, ugh, that muscle doesn't even twinge when we hear that stuff. But this was sort of, a big watershed moment. And then after that, the news shows, the nightly news, they started reporting about spin. They started reporting about how stories were made and how the public face of government was constructed. And this was instead of just saying this happened or that happened, they were saying this is how the government wants you to think about how this happened. And it was a really different kind of reporting that I noticed, And now what I'm noticing, it's sort of similar, is that the construction of personal brand is now totally out in the open. And people will talk about what they're doing to construct their personal brand. It's not even like a secret. It's not it's like a normal thing. And I find that quite astounding. One of the devices that I think is useful, and I've posted about it on Facebook a couple of times, is for other people who are spiritual teachers to take what they post on social media and put it in the mouth of a spiritual great being like Buddha or Christ or Ma or Krishna or something, right? So, for instance, just the other day, somebody I know on Facebook posted, I want to know if you've learned things from my posts on Facebook. Could you please give me feedback about whether what I've said is important and whether you've learned things from me? And then, if you imagine like Buddha or Jesus posting something like, hey, Jesus here, wondering how you feel about what I said. It shows you how utterly ridiculous this is and how egotistical it is and how not what spiritual life is about this is. But it's so normalized now that nobody even notices that it's weird. So we have to denormalize all the ways that we're doing stuff like that to get our energy back, to get our ground back, to get our sturdiness back. Ojas gives us sturdiness in the face of, lives that everyone has a difficult life on some level. And we need our ojas, we need our sturdiness. And the only way we can get that is by really standing on our own ground, and the ground of our real circumstance and who we really are. That's the only ground we have to stand on. We don't have another ground. Brand is not a ground. It's like an ice flow in a decaying climate, in a heating climate. We always feel under threat when we're trying to project things like that.